what are the most watchable teams of 2020? Doesn't have to be the best teams, just the most watchable. And that's the only phrase that we're going off here, making our choices. So I'm excited to see where we all go with this one. Daigle, energetically, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. And I think there are a couple of obvious outliers here. So I'm going to go off the cuff a little bit to start. And it's because I believe the Detroit Lions offense was one that could have matched anyone point for point when Matthew Stafford was healthy. First off, they finished 21st in points per play last year, but actually ranked 13th overall in Stafford's 8 starts. He was on pace for his highest marks in passing yards and touchdowns since 2011. And that was only through 8 games in his first year under new OC Darrell Bevell. Also, that included C.J. Anderson, highway robbery for 16 touches in their first 2 weeks. C.J. Anderson, who we forget was even on the Lions at one point. Stafford also led all quarterbacks, Jameis Winston under Bruce Arians included, with a league-high 10.7 intended air yards per attempt, which is a number that factors in completions. So it shows us his intent every time he drops back. In a recent Zoom interview, he actually said that he felt behind last year because he wasn't present in OTAs as the family and his wife, Kelly, dealt with that tragedy and removing and recovering from her brain tumor. But this year, he even mentioned that he's been in every single meeting, virtual meeting with the team, also throwing off the field away from facilities with Marvin Jones and a handful of others. So the fact that he's been present, they returned all their notable skill players, and not only that, but upgrade in their receiving game and adding DeAndre Swift, who again averaged over 9 yards per catch in his time at Georgia, even lining up out wide at times. I not only think this offense is one of the most fun to watch, I think they'll actually be improved in year 2 under Bevell.
They will be. So it's actually is like a good like contrarian answer because I don't think they'll be one of the most watchable, but people probably do underestimate how watchable they will be. And for as much as you make fun of Matt Patricia, he did actually make the one important adjustment last year where they got rid of like the Stone Age running offense. And like you said, they're one of the league's most aggressive downfield passing teams until Matthew Stafford got hurt. And you laid it out well. There's watchable people, like fun people to watch play the game of football, like every position, including Matthew Stafford. It's more fun to watch teams that throw than pass, but the Lions have 2, really exciting, explosive young running backs. DeAndre Swift was my favorite running back in the draft. Then you have one of the best young receivers in the game. Well, Kenny Galladay is older than you think, but one of the best receivers in the game. One of the best young tight ends, hopefully in the game, a Gronkian type talent, and TJ Hawkinson. So I would never say they're going to be one of the most watchable, but yeah, if Matthew Stafford stays healthy, which he had almost every year for an entire decade, they will be a lot more watchable than people think.
But I mean, isn't the premise of this entire conversation is the most watchable? And like, I understand that they can be exciting, and Matthew Stafford is one of the biggest arms in the NFL, but this would not be one of my top 6 selections at all. I mean, this is a team who added in the last 2 years, like paid money to Geronimo Allison and Jesse James. Like, I understand that they've had some exciting moments, and Marvin Jones and Kenny Galladay, so on and so forth, all the names you just mentioned. But like, we're talking about a Matt Patricia-led team, how it's so vanilla. It can be so vanilla, this Detroit Lions team. And I understand that they are so much better than they used to be. This is still a team, I understand it was without their quarterback, that finished 3-12-1 last season. This is your selection. I cannot 86 it. But again, the Lions would not be among my top 6 selections this year.
That is mistaking wins for fun, though. Like the Lions, it doesn't matter if they win as long as their offense brings to the table what they did under Stafford. They were one of my top 5 teams to watch last year when he was under center, and they were 3-4-1 when he was under center. Because 7 of those 8 games were one-score contest. Yes, Patricia being the head coach means they probably won't win those games, but the fact is they're still competitive because this offense is explosive. So even if you go 0-16, that doesn't mean you aren't fun to watch.
Hey, we all forgot about Danny Amendola, too. I mean, he's really what ties the room together. He's the Lebowski carpet of this offense. He really brings the room together.
Well, I hope people are still listening because I actually will go with a team that is exciting, fun, and wins football games. And to me, you cannot start off this list with any other team other than the Baltimore Ravens.
Easy way out.
It should be. I mean, there's a reason why that the Baltimore Ravens should enter 2020 as the most watchable team in the NFL is because they exited 2019, the regular season, as the most watchable team in the NFL. And if I can just encapsulate it down to one little package, it's that Lamar Jackson had more touchdowns last season than the Ravens punted. Let me repeat that. Lamar Jackson had more touchdowns than the amount of times the team punted. We like offense. And there is no other type of offense like the Ravens in the NFL. And while so many try to mimic other offenses or styles or winning after the catch or quick passes or so on and so forth, there's no one else in the league that can do what the Ravens do right now. And it's not like they lost anything. Yes, Marshall Yanda retired. But this is also a team that's going to have Marquise Brown, who's an electric vertical playmaker, entering his second year. Miles Boykin, who's one of the most athletic wide receivers in the NFL. And then you have Lamar Jackson, who we saw the jump from year 1 to year 2 of him as a passer and obviously as a runner. And I can only anticipate and get excited about what Lamar Jackson is going to show in the jump from year 2 to year 3.
Good point. A team we're going to talk about later is the most watchable in the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs. So don't call the Ravens the most watchable because the Chiefs are the most watchable. But the Ravens are definitely top 3 or 4. I do think last year, though, the machine ran with like so few hiccups last year that I don't think we're going to see like a better version of that offense. I think we probably saw like the absolute peak of what this offense could look like last year because the reasons you laid out, it was basically as good as like any offense can be almost. I think it's probably fair to expect a little regression off of last year. But yeah, when you have a talent like Lamar Jackson, that it's like he's like the definition of must-see football. So the Ravens easily one of the 2 or 3 most fun teams to watch in the NFL.
Plus, in terms of just being fun, I do wonder, even if their efficiency in their offense falls just a bit, which is what we all expect, this means that the Ravens will probably be forced to put their foot on the gas more. And a team that is forced to throw more and can't just lean on creative ways to run the ball, that means more touches for Lamar Jackson, which means more fun, in my opinion. So I think this offense only has room to grow in terms of watchability because also, I don't know if it'll happen, but we could get Miles Boykin involved on the outside. We could see Justice Hill involved, even though I don't think so. And they already came out and said, Harbaugh, that he would like to see Lamar Jackson. He'll basically force Lamar Jackson to throw downfield more. Lamar Jackson already attempted the 8th most air yards per attempt last year. And so when they lean into stacked boxes, if the offensive game plan is to have him chunk downfield more, that also seems fun.
It's rare for players to come along that are just so unique in the NFL, right? And that have no present day comparison. And that's what Lamar Jackson showed halfway through his rookie season, and obviously even more so in his second season. I mean, he's already a better passer at this point in his career than Michael Vick ever was. And then you have Greg Roman, who, is creative in his running schemes, allows his quarterback to make people miss in the open field and completely break ankles, which he did 3 to 4 to 5 times. How many times do we see professional athletes who are getting paid millions of dollars look like high schoolers in the open field trying to tackle a football player? It's not that often. And I think Lamar Jackson set the record in that last season. And to cap it off, defenses can also be fun. Defenses can also be exciting. And the Ravens have one of the most exciting defenses out there. And I would highlight 2 names. I would highlight Marcus Peters, who is unafraid to jump routes, to take chances, to take risks, and create pick sixes. And I would also highlight Earl Thomas, who's in some ways changed his game since joining the Baltimore Ravens. He used to be the center field type. Now he's winning even more often near the line of scrimmage, had his first 2 sacks of his NFL career, which is crazy to think about in 2019. And somehow Marlon Humphrey is still good despite wearing number 44. To me, that's watchable as well.
You don't like fullback numbers on defensive backs, Josh?
Call me crazy.
I had another Ravens thought to add there, but then I forgot it. So we should just edit this comment out.
Well, I didn't even think about the 3 running backs that they have, and now the 4 running backs that they have. Right? They have Mark Ingram, who's been in the league for quite some time, who's an electric personality. You have Gus Edwards, who's this 1970s style Northwest runner or North-South runner. You have Justice Hill, who can win out in space. And now you bring in a rookie in J.K. Dobbins, who made Clemson look awful at the college level. Every single layer is intriguing and extremely watchable for the Ravens. That's why they are the most watchable team in the NFL. All right.
I was gonna say with Lamar Jackson, you talk about how he makes people look silly. Michael Vick did that too, but like a huge difference I feel like is Lamar is extremely savvy at avoiding big hits too, and which I hope will prolong how long he's able to play this swashbuckling style of football, because he is one of the best running quarterbacks I've ever seen at avoiding unnecessary contact. And it only takes one big hit to make a huge difference, but he's so much better than like Tim Tebow or Michael Vick or RG3. He avoids like that huge contact that could really injure a quarterback.
All right, we are on to the 3rd most watchable team in the NFL entering 2020. Pat, this one goes to you.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily based on last year. I'm going with the Arizona Cardinals. And part of the first year with Cliff and Kyler last year is that I've talked about this before in the pod. They couldn't quite figure out what they wanted to be. I think they were surprisingly run heavy a lot of the season, and then some of the weeks where they were very pass heavy, they couldn't figure out if they wanted to be vertically focused or horizontally focused. So I think they're going to have a much better idea of the kind of offense they want to be this year, and is telegraphed by going out and getting DeAndre Hopkins. It's going to be the expected Cliff passing focus and hopefully a downfield focus. And so first off, teams that want to use 4 wide receivers are kind of like by default much more watchable. And then you have 4 wide receivers, where one of them is DeAndre Hopkins, who has just such unreal body control down the sideline, down the field. And someone in Kyler Murray, who even last year in kind of the ups and downs, I felt like dropped dimes down the sideline that very few other NFL quarterbacks are capable of. So I think we're going to see a lot more big plays down the field from this vertical pass-happy offense. And then, the running game, it was sophisticated and fun to watch last year, and now they have Kenyon Drake. Well, I was going to say he had a full offseason. He has a full Zoom offseason in the offense. But will be much more integrated into the offense, and a player we always knew was capable of being a 3-down back and making big plays, and just for whatever reason almost never got the opportunity in Miami, but he delivered on what we always expected Kenyon Drake could do last year. And just Kyler Murray, the combination of Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury, and DeAndre Hopkins, and just what we know the Cardinals want to do on offense, I think they're just going to easily – they were already fun to watch last year, even if highly inconsistent. Some weeks they were kind of an eyesore. I think they're going to be definitely one of the most fun teams to watch in the NFL this year.
A lot of coaches wouldn't have had the self-perspective to turn their offense into the horizontal attack when they were trying to throw deep, whenever they looked around and saw that they were just talent deficient on the boundaries. And yet that's what Kingsbury did. And now we're going to argue a lot about DeAndre Hopkins' target share undoubtedly decreasing, but perhaps the efficiency in that offense increasing and thus keeping him involved no matter what. Either way, for fantasy, DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best receivers in the entire league. And that's something that the Cardinals didn't have last year. And now suddenly they do. And you take Trent Sherfield or even Pharaoh Cooper, who's gone, off the field now, and even perhaps sprinkle in maybe everyone's favorite sleeper last year, Akeem Butler, or Andy Isabella, who ran the most amazing 88-yard sluggo and is still surviving off of that one catch this season. It is a revamped offense. And they were already, as you said, Pat, super exciting last year. So just imagine them with better pieces in 2020.
Yeah, Diego, I'm glad that we are of like mind once again. We can be friends once again after how this podcast started, because we made the exact same point here. Because what excites me most is, one, we saw what Kyler and Cliff in the running game did together last year with a roster that was probably lacking in talent, obviously, compared to a lot of other rosters across the league. Meanwhile, you saw Cliff already evolve as a first-year head coach. I bring it up all the time, and we're not going to talk about the Bengals, so I can bring up Zach Taylor here. I still don't know who Zach Taylor is as a coach. I can tell you point blank who Cliff Kingsbury is a coach, right? And that's important after his first year in charge. I mean, they ran 3 wide receiver sets 36% of the time last year, 12 personnel, so 2 tight end sets 23% of the time last year, and then 4 wide receiver sets 31% of the time last year. Like those are 3 different personnel groupings that you create different mismatches with. But not just that, it wasn't in an ideal situation. He showed evolution. He showed he's willing to change based on the personnel that you guys were talking about. And that excites me. And if we look and kind of can picture a perfect setup for the Cardinals this year, I think at his core, Cliff is going to be a 3 or 4 wide receiver offense. But we know if that's not working, he just goes back to what worked last year, which was a lot of 2 tight end sets as well.
First off, too, I think DeAndre Hopkins, by the way, might still approach 150 targets. That might not be a popular opinion. He's hit that number his final 5 years in Houston. But, Josh, you laid it out. I mean, we saw more evolution from Cliff Kingsbury in one season than we did from Chip Kelly's entire career. When offensive auteurs flame out, it's because they can't adjust their offense. And I wouldn't have guessed the personnel percentages were that varied last year. I mean, that's crazy for Cliff Kingsbury to be that adaptable in his first year as an NFL head coach. But I do think at his heart, in his heart, he wants to be a 4 receiver offense. I think we're going to be a downfield aggressive, high volume passing offense. And I just think it's going to be fun to watch. And I think it'll also sustain DeAndre Hopkins more than people are thinking on Twitter.
It is 4 receivers at the roots because the playbook is an air raid offense. He just didn't have the personnel, as we said. However, unlike Chip Kelly, unlike a lot of coaches who have been in the league for 10 plus years, we saw humility and being humble out of Kingsbury. And that's something we don't see out of anyone. Just to check your ego at the door and say, I don't have the team for this. I have to try something new. And that's what gives me confidence in them.
And we just spoke 5 minutes on this Arizona Cardinals team, and we barely even mentioned Kyler Murray's name. I mean, Kyler Murray's rookie year is still not getting enough attention. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've said that 12 times on this offseason podcast, but certain throws that he made that he elevated everyone around him, it's uncommon. And already doing that as a rookie in a bad situation in many cases shows that no matter what the ups and downs are of a game, of a drive, of a moment, Kyler Murray is going to be there to take you out of it. And that's something that I am always attracted to with quarterback play. Meanwhile, this is also a team that just drafted Isaiah Simmons in the draft. Isaiah Simmons, and obviously the Cardinals.
Another hybrid.
Well, and the Cardinals don't have a ton of defensive pieces. I mean, Budda Baker's interesting. Obviously, Patrick Pearson's been there forever. Chandler Jones, my friend, almost always is among the league leaders in sacks. But Isaiah Simmons, what we can see him do, hopefully used in a variety of ways, not just stuck at linebacker. It will be interesting to see and see that evolution as well.
You said something about Kyler that I think should be Kyler is already kind of why the cliche can drop it in a bucket exists. I feel like he can drop downfield passes and onto a pinpoint, and just seeing that paired with DeAndre Hopkins' body control is just something I'm so excited to see this upcoming season.
I'm looking at Kyler Murray's rushing last year. I mean, he only had 93 carries for 544 yards and 4 touchdowns. Don't we think he can hover near 750 rushing yards next year too? I mean, and we talked about Lamar being great at avoiding tackles. Kyler showed that as well on his runs. I mean, he gets down easily. And in fact, I would say that their sack numbers are going to drop dramatically last year because Kyler at times would just sack himself, right? He would just drop to the floor because he didn't want to take big hits in the pocket. So, I mean, it would be shocking if this team doesn't evolve in the win-loss column next year and progress in the win-loss column. But even if they don't, we saw traces in the first year again of Kyler and Cliff together, plus a lack of talent around him, that they were already one of the teams that I went back and rewatched on Game Pass every single week because they already were watchable to me. So
we discussed their offensive line several times on this podcast, had varying opinions on it. And I just don't think that offensive line analysis is apples for apples. You have to take into account that Kingsbury masked one of the worst offensive lines in college football at Texas Tech for years and years, and it didn't matter because he was so good at hiding them. And just the fact that Kyler Murray is a terrific runner outside the pocket. Yeah, the sacks, of course, rushing quarterbacks take more sacks. That's understandable. But in this case, we know their offensive line got better in adding 2 important pieces at both tackle spots. And I just don't think it matters anyways in Kingsbury's play calling.
I mean, this is most likely Larry Fitzgerald's last season, Pat, right?
For the 5th straight year.
Yeah, we've said that in 5 straight seasons. Do we think that he ends up as the third pass catcher of that group, the fourth pass catcher of that group, because you talk about maybe DeAndre still getting 150 targets. That would have to be obviously at the detriment of someone. And we've seen Larry, take a decline in his career. But could it be that he only sees 60 targets in his final season?
Well, he has a way of Peterson goring where he kind of like takes away touches. Maybe he'll just take the touches away from a Christian Kirk, who, kind of had a baffling sophomore season. And, if they can really get the downfield outside passing cooking, maybe there'll be a lot of free money for Larry over the middle of the field. Because things just did not come easy. A lot with the bad personnel they had outside, things were not coming easy over the middle of the field. And hopefully things are a lot easier for Larry Fitzgerald. But Larry has been a second half fade player for like several seasons in a row, but he looked older last year. And yeah, Larry Fitzgerald might not be a fantasy commodity in 2020.
All right, let's reset. Let's talk through the first three picks of the most watchable teams of 2020. John Daigle picked the Detroit Lions to start. I picked the Baltimore Ravens, and then Pat went with the Arizona Cardinals. We have three more selections here, so we'll have six of the most watchable teams in 2020. Really five, because Daigle already went with the Lions. Daigle, rebound. What's your second pick in this draft?
I will add, not rebound, and I will go with the most obvious pick that I didn't want to label first, and it's because it's the Kansas City Chiefs. Whether it's 3rd and 15 or a miraculous 24-point comeback, it doesn't matter. They're always in every single game due to Patrick Mahomes. It's as if you're drafting a Madden franchise, which Pat knows all too well. And you're at the top of the draft and you have Patrick Mahomes there, and you take him and you just allow the rest of the draft to sprinkle out. You grab some of the best defenders in the game, and then you're like, oh, Tyreek Hill's here. Why not just lob fly routes to him? Okay, that's fun. And then, we'll add Mecole Hardman's 99th percentile 40 in the next pick, and we'll have some more speed on this offense. So Patrick Mahomes just attack. How about later then, we draft Travis Kelce, the best receiving tight end in the game, just to shore up our red zone offense. And then we'll also add Sammy Watkins, who does run a majority of his routes as annually tracked fly routes from the slot as more of a decoy option. But hey, he's still there. He still gets downfield. And then, of course, we can fill it out with Demarcus Robinson and, more importantly, a 21-year-old who is arguably the best receiving back of the entire 2020 class. It's as if they had the greatest talent in the league and surrounded him with even more weapons to make his strength stronger. And I say it's as if because it is what's happening and what did happen. And that's why they're just the most fun to watch.
We talked about earlier about Lamar Jackson being a unique skill set and already in all of NFL history, like one of the more unique skill sets. Patrick Mahomes is still on a completely another plane than even Lamar Jackson. We're just a mutant skill set and does things, that we have literally have not seen. I mean, he does no look passes. So he's doing things that have literally never been done before. And just the escapability, the cannon. And like you said, the way the personnel they've paired with his skill set is absolutely perfect. And, Andy Reid is always going to have one of the smoothest looking offenses in the NFL. And even if he has Alex Smith, but when he has Patrick Mahomes, it's on another level entirely. And the Chiefs Andy Reid's always one of the most watchable coaches regardless. Andy Reid with Patrick Mahomes just isn't fair. And, if you're like looking for a Game Pass team, like somehow you miss the Chiefs on a Sunday, they're always going to be the first team you want to rewatch. And the Chiefs are they're the team of the moment in the NFL right now. And if I had to pick one team that I was allowed to watch in 2020, it would be the Kansas City Chiefs.
I often think back to watching Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech prior to him entering the NFL, just like what my thoughts were at that time. And it's difficult because one, player evaluation can feel pointless at times because it doesn't matter how confident you feel in people, they end up failing. But with Patrick Mahomes, what you often try to do is find someone that is of a comparison in the NFL, just from a style-wise, how they win, where they win, and one that's already succeeding. For Mahomes, there wasn't anyone like that was currently winning in the NFL, because at Texas Tech, you would see him go to the right side of the field, go to the left side of the field, drop 25 yards in the pocket like Pat does in Madden, and then just launch these passes off this, unbalanced base that were just perfect throws. And so it made you think like, yeah, we know he can do this at Texas Tech. Can he do this in the NFL? Yeah, he can. But that was part of the reason why I wasn't certain in his evaluation. That's part of the reason why a lot of people in the NFL weren't certain in his evaluation, because he created his own lane at the quarterback position. That is so rare to find. Now, when so many years, decades even, teams were searching for their Peyton Manning, their Tom Brady, right? Their statues in the pocket that did exactly what the coach wanted them to. Mahomes does that too, though. And I think we often forget that. We often forget that he's not just this highlight reel big arm thrower. Everything inside of structure, the quick game even, he does that as well. And then he offers everything on top of it. He is the perfect quarterback in the NFL for this moment. And he's only entering his fourth season in the NFL, his third season in the NFL.
Third as starter.
It is just a joy to watch.
Everyone forgets also in his final year at Tech, he played those 12 games with a dead, not even injured, a dead left shoulder the entire season, and still passed for over 500 yards 4 times, including 730 yards on 88 attempts against Oklahoma.
Patrick Mahomes, he's not a completely, like, there are comparisons he's just the evolved version of Aaron Rodgers. Is really what I see when I see Patrick Mahomes. He's like Aaron Rodgers 2.0, just in terms of like those throws he can make off balance and the arm strength and the mobility. He's just the evolved version of Aaron Rodgers.
And already won a Super Bowl in his second season as a starter.
In 20 years, like, it's not too early. He's the greatest quarterback ever. In 20 years, we'll be saying that.
It can go in that direction. Yes. Maybe in 20 years, we're not doing this podcast, so you don't have to be held accountable for that comment.
I'm doing this podcast 20 years.
I want to bring up Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's name because, there's this big debate in fantasy circles right now of, Andy Reid loves to use 2 backs. We can't forget about Damian Williams. What if Clyde Edwards-Hilaire is the closest thing to Christian McCaffrey entering the NFL that we've seen the last few years? That's possible. I mean, he just caught 55 passes at LSU, which is the highest rate since I think at least 2010 among all those talented SEC backs. He can be used in the slot. He can use that wide. That's not very important because it's rarely used in the NFL, but he can make linebackers, safeties, whoever miss on angle routes out of the backfield. And then he makes you miss in the open field and between the tackles. I mean, I understand that we have some hesitation right now because it wasn't a top 10 selection, right? It was the end of the first round. But it wouldn't be shocking at all if we look here in year 2 or year 3, just as McCaffrey has gone on, that Clyde Edwards-Hilaire is taking up 80-something% of the backfield work and absolutely dominating in that Chiefs offense.
Well, the argument in fantasy circles is his role, can it pay off second and first round ADP? The argument isn't his talent as a receiving back. We know he's talented. We know he's arguably more talented than Damian Williams, and we know he'll have the pass catching role, at least on third down to himself. And so that does as well make the offense better.
Pat, let me ask you this question. Who on this Chiefs offense or defense even can take the next step? Who on the Chiefs can take the next step? Because, you point to Juan Thornhill on the defensive side who, looked great in the first half of his rookie year, then, missed the playoffs as well. Chris Jones has taken his game to the next level. Is it somewhat could it be Mecole Hardman? Who's that next player that you think is going to really improve entering 2020?
It's Mecole Hardman. I mean, what he did on limited had some crazy stat about his efficiency that I couldn't dig up in time. But what he did, the extremely limited targets and catches last year, easily cleared 500 yards and was advertised as Tyreek Hill 1-for-1 replacement when that was never going to be realistic. But I mean, he had Tyreek Hill game-breaking ability down the field. He's not as big of a game breaker as Tyreek Hill. But Mecole Hardman was advertised as a rookie, and that paired alongside Tyreek Hill, I mean, it should just be absolutely terrifying for NFL defenses. So I think, and Sammy Watkins, I think everyone's accept that the Chiefs and Sammy Watkins included, that he's going to have more diminished role, more of a number 3 receiver at this stage of his career. And I think Mecole Hardman is going to be the one. I mean, it's not a bold answer, but I think Mecole Hardman is the obvious and correct answer.
I also think Tyreek Hill is the best wide receiver in the NFL. So
He's the most indefensible wide receiver in the NFL, which is probably the same thing. I think it might honestly still be Mr. DeAndre Hopkins, but we'll find out.
I'll mention Michael Thomas just so that we don't get mentioned.
There we go.
There you go. Just safety.
Just for the ratings and reviews on this podcast, I appreciate it. Which all of you, if you enjoy it, leave us a review. It helps us out. Okay, I'll go to the next one. It's a team I've talked about a lot. In our text thread before this, I mentioned that I never would have thought that I would be coined the Buffalo Bills fan of this podcast. But here we are.
That's a worse answer than the Lions, just for the record.
Let me get into it.
That is untrue, but yes, Josh.
Earlier this May, this was Sean McDermott, the head coach's quote on the team. Most times how the quarterback goes is how the team goes. Josh is very aware of that in his responsibility. So if we can eliminate all that coach speak and just boil it down to one phrase, Sean McDermott is saying that 2020 is coming down to Josh Allen. And that makes them watchable on its very own, because there is no quarterback that is more of a roller coaster. The highs, the lows, the fast pace, the slow pace of what was that, than Josh Allen. And, Josh Allen is who he is. He's not going to change. He's not going to become this accurate, perfect passer that everyone wants him to be, because he's exactly winning the same way that he did at Wyoming. And it contributes to wins in total. But if you're searching for, perfection and just the ideal of an NFL offense, then sure, maybe the Buffalo Bills are not for you in 2020. But for me, the chaos, the electricity, the pedal to the floor style of what this offense has to be, even when they try to pull Josh Allen back, no matter what, there's going to be one or two drives that he's like, nah, man, I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to forget about you, Brian Daboll. That, to me, makes them one of the most watchable teams of 2020.
This is like the Aston Villa fan in you seeking pain and punishment instead of pleasure out of sports viewing. And Josh Allen is one of the most watchable players in the NFL in terms of you don't know what's going to happen. Is he going to throw a 60-yard pass, or is he going to spin backwards for an 18-yard sack? And I'm glad you brought up that Sean McDermott quote, because that's a quote I've kind of lasered in on this offseason. I think people kind of ignore it. We're getting way fewer notable coach quotes than usual for obvious reasons. But I think that was maybe the most notable coach quote of the entire offseason, because the way I interpreted it, correct me if I'm wrong, I think maybe the way you're interpreting it is that they're putting the offense on Josh Allen's back. They want him to carry the offense. The way I kind of interpreted the quote was, if Josh doesn't step up and make big early progress this year, we're no longer going to view Josh as our quarterback of the future. I kind of viewed that as putting Josh Allen on notice more than giving Josh Allen the leadership baton, because so Josh Allen, a great runner, but when you don't threaten defenses down the field consistently, when you don't hit those throws consistently, they're more free to tee off on you. And that's what happened last year with Josh Allen, where he wasn't making these big plays. He wasn't a spiked week player in fantasy last year, which is what we all wanted him to be. He was kind of a weirdly floor-based player, even with the erratic play. But we wanted him to be a spiked week player because on the premise that he was going to hit big plays down the field and score a lot of rushing touchdowns. And he did score 9 rushing touchdowns, but his rushing efficiency took a huge step backwards, because when you're not threatening people with your arm, they'll focus more on your legs. And I think that trend could continue more for 2020. And I said this already on the podcast, but just when we came out of Wyoming, we knew what Josh Allen's red flags were. And to me, I just think the red flags are beginning to look more like fatal flaws. And he's going to be one of the most fascinating players in the NFL to see this season. But I have not seen enough from Josh Allen.
Whether it's giving him a short leash or putting him on his shoulders, I think that's the same thing in year 3 at least. Who knows what happens in 2021. For this year, I think it still makes them watchable. You even look at that New England game where they had 3 points at the half and the final was 10-16. But before Josh Allen got injured and Matt Barkley came in, every single drive felt like playoff baseball. Like you're counting 27 outs, 26 outs. And it's because every single time the Bills had the ball, you knew something would happen. I mean, instead what happened was missing Zay Jones wide open, taking a sack 11 yards behind the scrimmage, fumbling, throwing another pick. But the fact that Josh Allen still it even made them so much fun to see because like you could feel it on the edge of your seats. Like we don't know what's going to happen here. Like Josh Allen could hit an 80-yard bomb or he could just fumble and Gilmore could recover it and run it in. I think that's what makes them watchable, that thing. I don't know if Josh Allen will be good. I don't know if the Bills are going to make the divisional round, whatever. They're still watchable as long as Josh Allen has the ball every single down.
It's true. I was going to say, I think maybe Matt Barkley was better that game. And the ultimate Josh Allen game was the wild card round because they got out to like that 16-0 lead. And then his miscues down the stretch were like almost incomprehensible for an
But they were so much fun to watch. Like
exactly, Pat.
Yeah.
Look, they either win the division or they fail to reach expectations this year. That's it. And I know, Pat, that you still think the Patriots are going to win it, but the rest of the football universe believes this is the Buffalo Bills' time. And there's an added layer onto this as well. You mentioned missing on intermediate and vertical shots. Well, you bring in Stephon Diggs. And we have seen that when Stephon Diggs doesn't get the accurate pass that he wants or doesn't get the target that he wants, he lets it know. He lets it known in his emotions on the field. He lets it known in his emotions off the field. That only adds to the watchability of this team, the dynamic of this veteran receiver who is one of the best route runners in the NFL, now joining one of the most erratic players, yet pedal to the floor playmakers in the NFL. I don't know how the Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen experiment is going to play out. Like we do know basically with DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray, that would be a shock if that failed. Like it's only going to be good things there. I don't think the same thing can be said here with Allen to Diggs. And if he even meets maybe what he put up with the Minnesota Vikings last year, and again, we saw what his emotions were during the 2019 season.
And it was a role. Steph Diggs, they used him finally way more as a downfield weapon last year, and he really excelled in that role. And but Steph Diggs is probably like, the grass has got to be greener than Kirk Cousins, right? And then they gave him Josh Allen, and we're going to see.
You are just a hater, Pat. You are such a Josh Allen hater. I mean, there is no player that I think, and I don't want to, I'm joking by saying that. But,
yeah, you finish.
But he is someone who does have positives to his game, Pat. I understand that there's a lot of negatives and he doesn't play the position perfectly, but I don't see a case where, unless they just bottom out completely, that he's not the quarterback in 2021.
I think that's probably a 25, 33% chance he's not the quarterback in 20. What are the positives? I mean, he's deadly. He's a legitimate threat with his legs. But I mean, the passing took a step back last year. The spiked weeks took a step back last year. And I just have we really seen enough development from Josh Allen as a passer to have faith that he'll get a fourth year as starter next year? I don't think we have. Like this year, I mean, I think Sean McDermott said it. This is the year. We have to see it this year. And if we don't, this experiment is going to be in its end stage. And it's weird. I was to say, I love the Bill. I love Sean McDermott. He's one of the best hires the past 5 or 6 years. And even if the Bills fail this year, Sean McDermott is going to remain the coach of the future in Buffalo. But we haven't seen it from Josh Allen, and we could see it. I mean, the tools are incredible, but this is the year that we have to see it.
All right, Pat. Go ahead, Daigle.
Just going to say quickly, watching Josh Allen reminds me a lot of watching Uncut Gems. Like you may hear differing opinions of it, but it's not because people don't or dislike the art. It's because their hearts just
Best movie of 2019, by the way.
Okay, we have one more pick in this most watchable of 2020. Pat, it's up to you. Close us out.
It's got to be the San Francisco 49ers because look how smooth they are just with kind of like the lack of talent, which I use in quotes because it's not a lack of talent. But when you can be this explosive of a run offense, and we have 440 yards against the New Orleans Saints passing last year, when you can be this explosive an offense, like when your quarterback's Jimmy Garoppolo, when your number one receiver is kind of like in doubt all year, it's like changing week to week. When your number one running back for the NFC Championship game is Raheem Mostert, like the stuff that Kyle Shanahan can do with kind of role players is just incredible. And hopefully we have a more talented offense this year. Hopefully we have a kind of a back to normal George Kittle after he didn't really miss time with injury last year, but played hurt. He did miss a few games and played hurt for a lot of the year. Hopefully we get a step forward from Jimmy Garoppolo. Just the stuff that Kyle Shanahan is able to do based on scheme alone. And when you have an offense that can rush for 220 yards in the NFC Championship game with Raheem Mostert as your running back, like that's an offense I'm tuning into. Because we had 2 years ago, Kyle Shanahan made Nick Mullins a thing briefly. Like this is just such a bulletproof scheme that it's one I look forward to watching every week. And we do have some pretty intriguing individual talents in this offense. So the 49ers are just a team that I loved to watch last year, and I think will be even more fun to watch this year.
Daigle?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if there's even a knock against Kyle Shanahan, no matter the pieces he had in place, even though he built this offense with pieces that fit around his own scheme. And just the fact in adding Brandon Ayuk, who averaged over 11 yards after the catch. Again, another player, much like Deebo Samuel, who led all wide receivers in rushing yards last year, another player who can do so. So it's not just adding players that fit at their positions, it's adding players that fit at multiple positions, which expands this offense even more in 2020.
Well, and this isn't the exact same team, obviously, that they went to the Super Bowl with last year. You know, they traded away DeForest Buckner before it was too late, right? Before they just lost him for nothing. Then they draft Javon Kinlaw as his replacement. I'm fascinated to see if this is going to be along the same lines as, you know, the Carolina Panthers following the 2015 Super Bowl, the LA Rams following the 2018 Super Bowl, that you go and have great seasons. I mean, again, the Panthers were 15-1 that year, then went 6-10 the next year. The Rams were 13-3 in 2018. Then 2019, they were 9-7. Both teams missed the playoffs. Can you see a chance, Pat, where this team follows in that line, that they just ultimately miss the playoffs? Because we just talked about the Cardinals. The Cardinals are very good. We know the Seahawks are consistently in it as well. And the Rams are still a very talented football team. I mean, the NFC West as a whole is probably the most watchable division in football.
Yeah, the 49ers could definitely be a Super Bowl hangover team. So I just gave them credit for how good the scheme is. But being like a scheme-based offense can be a vice as much of a virtue. And last year the scheme was executed to perfection. Like the sum was greater than the whole of its parts. But that's a low margin for error, and just a few things go wrong, a few bad games early in the season where they don't execute well, the things could spiral. So that is a very interesting point. So it's amazing to have this great scheme, but it still always comes down to personnel. And the 49ers, skill position personnel is not amazing, or at least not proven. It's still very unproven. And it's a low margin for error setup right now for the 49ers. But Kyle Shanahan is so good at executing his offense, but it is a low margin for error offensive setup right now.
Buckner was undoubtedly a disruptor among a line full of disruptors, but I don't consider the drop-off to Kinlaw, with everyone still in place, that much of a drop-off, to be honest. Plus, you have to remember Trent Williams at left tackle now. I mean, just arguably the most massive upgrade going from, Staley to now we have Trent Williams. Like, you don't drop off whatsoever. Perhaps you even get better. So, I don't know. I don't think they lost too much in the offseason, to be quite honest.
No. I mean, there are layers to it. You mentioned Trent Williams coming in. We haven't seen him play football in quite some time.
That's true.
There's also the case that this team boasts some of the best position groups across the NFL at certain spots. I mean, they have arguably the best tight end in the NFL in George Kittle. Maybe it's not even arguable, right? Then I think Fred Warner at linebacker, as an off-ball linebacker, might be a top 3, top 4 player at his position in the NFL. Then I don't know if there's a unit across the league that has more disruptive, creative depth along their front 4 or front 5 pass rushers. And then you still have Richard Sherman back there. This team absolutely belongs to be on this list of one of the most watchable. And it seems like, Kyle Shanahan becomes even more creative. And obviously he even has like Kyle Juszczyk going out there and doing creative things offensively and defensively. I kind of reject your point that, talent-wise, it might not be there, because I think absolutely this is one of the most talented teams across the board.
No. Defense especially, of course, is like prodigiously talented. And the offense is like deep and versatile. And they have another guys like Jalen Hurd, who didn't even get to play last year. But again, they didn't have elite receiving talent last year. They didn't have elite backfield talent last year. They had a very banged up offensive line. I really did think on offense last year. And we don't know if Jimmy Garoppolo is good. I feel like we just don't know that. And I feel like the 49ers offense last year was really just a triumph of execution. The defense was a triumph of amazing skill collection and acquisition. I mean, the defense is a different story. Like, there's so much talent on that defense. And again, there's talent on the offense. But again, when you think of the 49ers, you don't think, when you think of like elite individual talents, other than George Kittle, it's not something you really associate with the 49ers skill players.
And you mentioned Jalen Hurd, who can play tight end as well. You also forget about Jarrett McKinnon, who we expect to come back healthy. And if not, there is still Jermichael Hasty there, who I even texted Ian when I was writing him up for our Rotoworld blurbs. And I said, hey, you need to watch this guy because he cuts like LaShawn McCoy. Like, he literally breaks ankles. So again, just another fun player in the mix.
All right. This is our list of the most watchable teams of 2020. John Daigle kicked us off with the Detroit Lions.
Correct.
I went with the Baltimore Ravens, Pat, the Arizona Cardinals, back to Daigle with a reasonable pick of the Kansas City Chiefs. Then I went with the Buffalo Bills, and then Pat closes out with the San Francisco 49ers. Quickly, are there any honorable mentions? I'll throw out one. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts should be up there. You know, the Indianapolis Colts have to be up there. And I wish we had more time to talk about them. But you have the trio of T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell. You have a running back group.
You have a trio where two players are completely unproven at the NFL level.
But then you also have Phillip Rivers, who, no matter what the situation is, he's going to try to throw deep. To me, I'm extremely excited, and hopefully it turns into watchability of what the Colts can become in 2020.
I'm not sure. I think extremely.
Well, nominate one. Nominate one.
I mean, we went through most of the Tennessee Titans. I'll be very fascinated to see, because that's another low margin for error offense. But when that offense is executed the way they executed it in the second half last year, you get so many big plays, and big plays not just in the passing game, but obviously also the running game. And, you know, hopefully a bigger role for another guy who can do major damage after the catch, and Jonnu Smith. So they were very watchable in the second half last year, but that's the thing that can fall apart quickly when you run that kind of offense. But the Titans are another team I'm very excited to watch this year. Maybe throw in the Philadelphia Eagles finally having more weapons for Carson Wentz, and talk about someone else who closed the season super strong last year.
How did we not talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
No,
I almost went with the Bucks.
I was going to mention that. Like, I've seen 20 years of Tom Brady. I don't want to watch him. No.
That is a good point.
You're not missing anything. It's not watchable.
All right.
I actually agree. The Patriots offense, when it's hitting on all cylinders, was one of the least watchable. This ruthless efficiency. I'm like, I can't watch another 7-yard pass. Like, I just can't do it.
Year one of Scott Turner with the Redskins will be more watchable than the Bucs. Not even kidding.
Well, the Bucs personnel disagree. Like, the Bucs personnel kind of changes that equation. So, I mean, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are must-see. Rob Gronkowski, even O.J. Howard maybe, must-see TV. So, I get the Tom Brady factor, but the Bucs personnel is on a different level.
I'll throw out the Denver Broncos and the Dallas Cowboys as one. And then finally, I mean, Russell Wilson's always watchable, right? Like, for 3 quarters, 2.5, they might not be watchable. But that final quarter and a half when he just takes over, no matter what the talent is around him, and DK Metcalf adds on to that probably more than any other player other than Marshawn Lynch has in Russell Wilson's tenure. But yes, the Seattle Seahawks are definitely watchable.
You're losing track of what's watchable. The Seahawks offense is not watchable. Get that out of here.
Okay. All right. Yeah, but apparently the Detroit Lions are. Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. Sorry.
Let's get out of here. For John Daigle and Patrick Doherty, I'm Josh Norris, up the Villa. Talk to y'all soon. See ya.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.